Hi, this is Hamad from General Assembly's Web Development Immersive program here in Washington, D.C. Today I'm here to talk about the full stack application I made for project number 2. So I'm going to demonstrate the app while talking about the code I wrote and what the process of building it was like. So here is the application as it is deployed to Heroku. So the user story for this application might look something like, as a Star Wars miniature collector, I want an application to help me see what miniatures are available so I can expand my collection. So this is a hobby of mine. I collect Star Wars miniatures and play the game with my friends. And it's kind of difficult to find information about what the individual stat cards for each of the miniatures is, and to kind of like plan out stuff according to that. So this is the application that I made to kind of help out with that. So these images that I got are courtesy of rebelscum.com. So this is a site that I use for the purposes of looking up miniatures. They have probably the best resources on it that I have found. But I had to ask them per use of their image use policy if I could use the images or not, and they did say yes. However, I'm limited to only 10 images. So that's what you see over here on the application itself. In the code, I just picked 10 different miniatures that I thought were cool, and I put them in as static files into the the code repo. But when in the future, if I had permission to do more, I would want to store them in the Mongo database as like image files so that I could use CRUD operations to add more of them. Because as it is, I'm only stuck with the 10 that I have right now. So this is the home page. What it allows you to do is that it'll show you all of the miniatures that I have in the database and allow you to add new ones. So right now I can say a new miniature, give it an image URL, which I know will work because the image URL has to be has to match one of the names of the image files themselves. Then I can create it. So there you go. You see there is a new miniature. And when you click on a given miniature, it will take you to another page where it will show you that individual information for it and give you another form where you can update it. So you could say, Han is so cool. Update it, and you can see the changes. So I changed the title. By default, I make it so that the form will auto-populate what the value of the given miniature information is, so that if you were just to exclude it, then you'd also be wiping the field out itself. So I had that in order to kind of prevent that from happening. And as you can see, you can go back to the main page, and it is indeed updated from the form. So I can click on it again. It not only works for the title, works for the image as well. And yeah, there you go. You can see less fortunate Han. And there it goes, Han and Carbonite. So I changed that. So again, changes apply to the home page where you see all of them, and you can also delete. So that covered the MVP for the CRUD requirements. So I can read all the miniatures, including individual ones. I can create one with the form on the home page. I can update it with the form that's on the individual page for each miniature, and then I can delete it. So that's a solid CRUD. What I also did is that I integrated user authentication here. So with sign up, what I can do is I can say, all right, I want to make an account with these guys. And it'll log you in after creating an account. So you can log out and log back in. That works. And I also was able to add flash messages for, I guess, useful information. So if I make a typo and I try logging in with an email that doesn't actually exist, then it'll tell me that the user wasn't found. So, and it just reroute me to the same login page. Now, if I try to log in, but my password is incorrect, then it'll also not let me go. There we go. And tell you, hey, password's wrong. And also for the sign up, if I try registering an email that's already registered, then it will also give you a warning telling you, hey, that won't work, and send you back to the page so you can try again. So that's the basics of the CRUD functionality. I use Materialize for the front end, and I mean, I could talk about that. Like, it was interesting having to use certain style rules in order to overwrite it. So for some things, you have to use the important flag to overwrite the specificity of the native classes that you include with Materialize. So that's sometimes a factor. And also, one thing that I found interesting while working with it was that you can use these helper classes to kind of give you certain functionality for it, just like utility classes. So like I can use row on a parent container and then column with certain sizes in order to size out the items and also make it responsive. So also you'll see that it'll still have the same formatting, but it'll adjust to the size of the screen. And the login bar, this is also pretty cool, will also break out this way so that you can still interact with it and the links still work just fine. So that's pretty cool. However, there were certain times where I found that it was easier to just use a CSS class and target that versus using the actual utility classes from Materialize. So over here, it's like I have this amber text for the header tag over here for all of the headers in the forms. Now for each view that I have to add that specific class, which is kind of inconvenient because it's just a one-line thing. All I have to do is just say color, whatever the color is, and I could do that in the CSS. So I do that for things like the input because it's a simple rule. Now for other things that are more complicated, like the grid system where I'm using row and column, the time that it would take me to write that from scratch would be longer than what it is for me to just add those classes to the individual items. So it's kind of a give and a take. It's useful for what it is, but it doesn't make sense to use it for everything. I mean, for the structure of the application itself, I used a pattern where I have the index.js, where this is what the package.json will actually run whenever you do node, and what Heroku will do when it's deploying as per the proc file. And then I have my database where I have the models broken out individually. Then I have a seed file that'll seed the miniatures collection. I break out the controllers and the routes separately. So the controllers actually just have the callback functions and exports an object full of just methods that'll have that, which is imported by the routes. And the routes will actually say for what path and what action or what verb to run the callback method. So something that was interesting that I realized from implementing it into this program versus what we just went over very briefly in class is that for user authentication, the callback functions actually take a third argument called next. Now this is really important because when it's actually being used, it'll pass in, I guess, some sort of function as like to run next. And that needs to be included in the methods for the actual controller itself. So you need next over here for the user authentication. However, you don't need it for the controller for just the CRUD operations on the generic model. So there are a couple other cool things that I kind of did over here. Like I found a way to dynamically say what port is actually being run whenever you run on NodeMon. So whenever I change it, it'll say like that. I found like I usually use arrow functions, but for this one I specifically cannot use an arrow function. That was fun to figure out. And also one thing that I do also want to mention, because it might be useful for other people, is in my seed file I actually use a different technique from what they taught us in class. So normally we use insert, which is a batch method. Now, that's good and well. However, the batch method is efficient, but it doesn't do the validation that Mongoose would normally do when trying to add something like add data as a document to a model, to a collection as per its schema. So what I use is actually the create method on the miniatures model itself, and passing in just an array, which is the seed data JSON. Now with this, it will do the validation. So it'll give me the underscore ID field, it'll give me the underscore V field for version. If I use the timestamp options, it would give me timestamps. It'll be created the same way as if I used the CRUD functionality itself. And I just prefer that because then it means that my seed file and the files that I make and the documents that I make through the CRUD are 100% consistent. There wouldn't be any difference for it. Now, again, I wouldn't use this for very large seed files because it's not very efficient and can actually crash your computer. And it also has some weird quirks with it too, in that there actually isn't a guarantee for what order the seed file will actually render in. So the order that I have it right now, when I seed it, if I run the seed file again, it could come out in a different order. So that's kind of weird, but it's just a quirk for how this implementation works. So those are two things that I thought were cool that were worth sharing. You're more than welcome to look at my project itself and kind of dig in for how I did some of the more technical stuff. I do want to wrap this up soon because there are people who are also waiting to do their screencasts. So thank you for taking the time to watch this, and may the force be with you. All right.